My name is Casey, and I started this channel in part to try to bring a future of fatherhood to America. And now that America has lost one of their most outspoken fathers, we have to look at the ways that these two fathers involved in what happened this week may have already saved America. I have been a therapist for 13 years, a husband for 11, and a father for 10. And if you can please like, share, and subscribe on the way in, I would love to earn your support. Let's get further into how two dads may have already saved America this week.
Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. My husband laid down his life for me, for our nation, for our children.
I, like so many others, was taken aback by the events of this week and see the parallels between what Charlie Kirk was doing and now being martyred in doing and what MLK was doing in the 1960s. It's just that the cultural temperature is that the right is ascendant now, whereas the left was ascendant then. However, that does not remove the humanity which we should all tap into in this moment, that Charlie was a father, a husband, and a believer in Jesus above all else that he might have done politically. And he actually had his family present at the time of his passing. And there are at least stories from the scene that his 3-year-old daughter ran to him after the sound rang out, because she wanted to be comforted by her father. And this I wanted to highlight as one of the ways that fatherhood could save and possibly already saved this country, because Charlie wanted other young men to experience the same joy that he had in the relationships that he had with his daughter and his son, as well as with his wife. And he wanted to promote a future of fatherhood in America, just like I'm trying to do on this channel. And he spoke, of course, to millions of young men, turned the tide toward conservatism among young men in the last election, along with sharing his faith and family values above all of that. You know, it happened that he was a Republican donor and political action organizer. However, above all else, he was a believer in Christ, and he was a father first, and he took the greatest joy in those roles. Of course, I stated in the beginning that it appears that two fathers may have saved this country, and Tyler Robinson, the alleged perpetrator of this event, his father was the one who alerted police that he believed it was his son who was involved, and he had the chutzpah and really the heartbreaking role of necessitating his reports to authorities and really convincing his son, bringing his son to speak to a youth pastor from their church in order to bring his son into custody and convince him that that was, in fact, the appropriate thing to do after the manhunt resumed for over 24 hours.
Recognized him in photos released by the FBI, and his son admitted he was the gunman. Robinson's father asked him to turn himself in, but his son replied that he would rather kill himself. The father then convinced his son to speak with their youth minister, who called the FBI, and agents later took Robinson into custody.
Imagine the heartbreak of that moment, a dad realizing that his child was involved in something destructive and intended to break the country apart, and choosing to do the hardest thing, to step forward in truth. This speaks volumes about the character of what it means to be a father, that you would try to convince your son to do what he thought was right, even when it would cost his son his freedom and possibly even his life in the long run. So here we have two very different fathers. Charlie Kirk, who promoted a daughter and son's role in his life and how wonderful and beautiful it was to have the family that he had. And the other father of Tyler Robinson, who apparently was a longtime police officer. He, even in tragedy, modeled responsibility and doing the right thing to his son, who was involved in one of the most heinous public acts that we've seen. Well, we saw another one earlier this week two of them really in the last 2 weeks, but one of the most heinous public acts, especially to someone of such a high profile, that we've ever seen. Both remind us that fathers matter. Strong dads protect, guide, and leave a legacy of truth. Even when our culture tries to downplay our role as dads, it's fathers who often make the difference between chaos and stability, between despair and hope. And I have 4 children. They ranges from ages 9 to 7 months. And I had some conversations this week about what it looks like to lose your life for what you believe in. And while I didn't certainly expose my kids to what Charlie Kirk was saying, although I would be happy to do so when they reach the age where they would understand it, I did speak about the fact that he, at his very best, died a person of faith and wanted the country to believe as he did and wanted what was best for people in what he believed was the best life, which was a conservative life, a Christian life, a life of family. And that ultimately cost him his life. And we did have those conversations this week, which I think are important, even when you have very small children. My son, I had told him, it is honorable to die for what you believe in. And to my daughters, I said, it is honorable to fight for what they believe in, but that they should always, and first and foremost, not always, but first, use their words in order to battle, because words can last forever. The words of the martyrs have lasted forever, whereas the kinetic force that you can offer into any fray, into any fracas, is a temporary and a ultimately, essentially, very risky proposition. But the words that you speak, if you do them like Alexander Solzhenitsyn or like MLK or like FDR for all his flaws, or like so many of the other great leaders, Abraham Lincoln, if you speak words, they can last forever. And that was the lesson that I tried to implant or impose upon my children during this time of tragedy.
How do you want to be remembered?
I mean, if I die?
Everything just goes away. How would you, if you could be associated with one thing, how would you want to be remembered?
I want to be remembered for courage for my faith. That would be the most important thing. The most important thing is,
if America is to heal and if our communities will thrive again, it will not be because politicians do this work alone. It will be because fathers rise up again to love their families, to stand firm in truth, and to show courage even when it costs them or even their children. So let us honor these 2 dads in very different parts of this crisis and in very different circumstances. They both reminded us the weight and wonder of fatherhood and what it can look like when fathers rise up to do the right thing in the face of great tragedy. Because maybe, just maybe, strong dads will save America.